Chief Justice.
Are you well?
I'm good, and you?
Very well, thank you. What were you doing at Standard Bank?
At Standard Bank, I was in the legal department,
Okay.
and our primary job was to do the recoveries. So we did the insolvencies, the liquidations, vehicle recoveries, dealt with bad debt, and so on.
Yes. I thought it's a bit better to spend more time as an attorney than as an advocate, but you don't seem to have stayed long as an attorney. Why so?
After Standard Bank, when I was at the Standard Bank, that is the time that I studied part-time. I did not go to university immediately after school, and then of course being at the Standard Bank gave me the opportunity to obtain my law degree because that's what I always wanted to do. And then, of course, that ultimately assisted me working in order to pay for my part-time studies. And when I obtained my degree, I then applied to do my articles. Back in the day, one could still apply for a 5-year articleship.
Yes.
And then if one did a minimum of 2 years, then one could be admitted. And when I was at the law firm, my desire to litigate, to be a practitioner, was quite attractive, and I felt that being in a courtroom excited me more than being in a law firm. And that's why after 2 years, once I was admitted, once I had passed my admissions, I then started with my pupillage.
So 2003 you joined?
2003, I then went to the bar and I started my pupillage.
And you've been there for about 15, 16 years.
16 years, Chief Justice. Long time.
Any appetite for silk?
Silk is, one has to be, in my view, in my experience, one has to be ready for silk. And of course, once there was the transition to the legal practice council being in charge of the legal practitioner's domain, there are whole different considerations. But then, of course, I started acting, and I fell in love with acting, and, all thoughts of applying for silk fell by the wayside.
Yes. Well, just tell us in your own words how ready you are and why you should be one of the two to be recommended for appointment.
Chief Justice, I love the work of a judge. I find it quite stimulating. I find the work challenging. And to me, being able to provide people access to justice, to helping the poor, but also, I think, to give litigants a different face. I mean, one knows about the gender issue on the bench. We have gender problems in our practice as well at the bar. And so I think for us to be a female judge and to be able to hear, to deal with litigants that will be able to interact and just have that connection. I mean, the bench must be representative of everyone. So I feel I'm quite ready.
Well, now that I understand, that's a good point. But you're not the only woman. Why should you be preferred above others? That's, That's the boasting that I want to hear.
our JP is in the wonderful position that he has wonderful candidates, and in fact, all of us can be appointed. And all three of us, all three women, he can choose, or you or the panel can choose any one of us. We all are brilliant, in my opinion. We have our special skills that we can bring, and he really is in a fantastic position to choose any one of us. So we all bring our own unique skills and approaches to the bench. And I don't think, and we are quite collegial. We have a great bench. So you have the pick.
Well, no, that is true. I accept, I take your word for it. I'm just saying, speak for yourself. In case we find ourselves in that difficult position of not knowing who of the three to choose, just give us something that makes you unique, something unique about you that we dare not forget, that we must factor into our decision making. Something that makes you different from others, but that still speaks to your suitability for appointment, if any.
I think three things. I'm not quite sure if my colleagues have mediation experience. I'm a mediator. I'm an arbitrator. I know that there is a push for court-based mediation that's very important, which goes to case flow management. I'm a firm believer and supporter for mediation. Secondly, in my personal capacity, I run a women's NGO. I'm the chair of an NGO. I work with rural women, grassroots women, and my function really is to uplift the women in order to give them the skills, because it's providing education, it's providing training. So we work with the women on the ground, the most vulnerable. So I think that would make me, I hope, stand apart from my peers, because I have that experience and I see the need.
We're running a project on mediation. It's called Win-Win Court-Annexed Mediation. Do you think litigants should be made to pay for court-annexed mediation?
If I understand the CJ's question, I think, first of all,
Let me explain myself.
please.
In some instances, you're a litigant, and your case looks like that which could be mediated,
Yes,
but you're made to pay
yes,
what the mediator requires as a fee.
yes,
But in other jurisdictions, you just come, it's the responsibility of the state to pay for mediation in recognition of the fact that some people don't even have the money.
that's right.
So what have you to say?
The most important aspect about mediation, and particularly court-based mediation, is access to justice. So of course we know that generally people can't afford litigation, and it's a time-consuming and it's a costly exercise. So of course, I remember 4 years ago I was invited, because I'm on the mediation committee of our bar, and I think when the pilot project started, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, at the instance of the minister, we were talking about the cost aspect of mediation. And most certainly, we spoke then about capping fees of mediators, but ultimately I think the most important thing is for litigants to be able to come to court. If there's a simple matter that can be mediated, they shouldn't have to pay. If in fact the state makes provision or puts a mechanism in place, because that really goes to the heart of it promotes, the principles that's enshrined in, equality before the law and access to justice.
Well, just by the way, it may interest you to know that we send in 7 judges to the US to deepen their understanding on win-win court-annexed mediation that nobody will have to pay for, but that's for the judiciary. Any bragging? You see, you almost missed out on this bragging opportunity. Any bragging? Any more?
Any? Sorry? Any more?
Do you want to brag
bragging.
more, or you want to leave it for later?
No, Chief Justice, I'll save it for the rest of the questions.
JP?
Thank you very much, Chief Justice. From bragging to racism.
Yes.
Is there racism in the profession? And with specific reference to the Cape Bar, what has been your experience over the past 15 years?
JP, I have been at the bar for the last 16 years, and most certainly there is racism at the bar, and I would go so far as to say that in fact there is racism throughout the legal profession. It's endemic and it's systematic, and it permeates through briefing patterns, skewed briefing patterns. And unfortunately, 25 years into democracy, it is still there, it's still prevalent. I know the bar has taken strides to try and rectify it, but most certainly it's something that's going to take a long time, I think, to eradicate out of the psyche of practitioners.
One last question, Chief Justice. What's your understanding of the notion of the rule of law? What does the doctrine of the rule of law mean to you?
JP, it stems from Section 165 of the Constitution. I mean, courts really are answerable only to the Constitution and to uphold the law. And yes, we have 3 different arms of government, and ultimately they are all interdependent, but the judiciary is answerable to the Constitution and to uphold its values and principles.
Thank you, JP. Does it not stem from Section 1 as one of the foundational values of our Constitution?
Yes, correct.
Ms. Stewart?
Thank you, Chief Justice. I presume you've seen the submission that was submitted by the Democratic Governance and Rights Unit. They made a submission on each of the candidates.
Yes.
And in that submission, they summarized some of the judgments which have been given. And one of the judgments of yours that they summarized is R versus S.
Yes.
I'm going to read you what they said because it caught my eye and it made me read your entire judgment. And I just have a question from it, which I'd like to ask you. This is what they say. With regards to the sentence, Kusevitsky AJ emphasized that there is no room in our society to be complacent or anesthetized by the prevalence of these heinous acts perpetrated against children. And then this is the important part. You held that the absence of severe physical injuries might be a reason to deviate from the minimum sentence. However, such a rationale did not have to apply to the crime of rape. You concluded that the appellant was a danger to the society and his conduct perpetuates a cycle of female oppression.
Yes.
So I was quite intrigued by your finding that the absence of physical injury doesn't necessarily apply to rape. And I went and actually read your judgment. And you didn't say exactly what they've summarized, you said, but you said more or less that, I'm going to read to you what you said. Just because it is frequent does not make it normal, and the courts are to guard against the notion that, in the absence of serious physical injuries, that the crime of rape is of a lesser degree. Courts have often found that the absence of severe physical injuries amounts to substantial and compelling reasons to deviate from the minimum sentence. However, it has to be accepted that abusers seldom need to use force to ensure the submission of their child victims. Sexual predators come in various forms. On the evidence, the appellant also violated another minor child. It is clear the appellant is a danger to society and his conduct perpetuates a cycle of female oppression.
Yes.
So what I wanted to ask you is, do you think that the absence of severe physical injuries has any relevance in a crime of rape?
What I found, and especially when we deal with appeal matters, one of the arguments that are used is, well, I've abused or I've assaulted the complainant, but it wasn't that bad. There are no bruises. It was maybe just one stab mark and not three. You know, it was okay. So that would be classified as substantial and compelling circumstances to justify a lesser sentence. And my view was that how can that be in the case of rape? Because a rape is a violation. There are hardly, and especially in this particular instance where it was a 7-year-old child by her grandfather, there are no external marks or bruises. So does that justify me saying, well, there are substantial and compelling circumstances? No. That child is scarred for life.
Thanks, Chief Justice.
Thank you so much, Ms. Stewart. Honorable Singh.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice. Good afternoon, Advocate.
Afternoon.
I note that in the nomination letter from Mr. Jeffrey A. Jacobs,
Yes.
he states that you were born in the Cape Flats area.
Yes.
Now, we all know that the whole question of gang violence and other violence in the Cape Flat area, especially that perpetrated against children who become victims, is a major problem.
Correct.
And irrespective of the fact that the SANDF have been deployed there at great cost, the violence still continues.
Yes.
Have you had to deal with any such cases of violence while you were acting judge? And what do you think is the actual cause of this kind of violence that we cannot seem to contain in the Cape Flats area?
Commissioner, I think it's a multifaceted problem. I think it's a case of, and I have had instance to deal with it. I think it's probably rate of unemployment vis-a-vis the lure of easy money with drugs. And unfortunately, our children are caught in the crossfire. And I think, in my view, the only way to stop it is for us to reach the children at school, to try and convince them, well, children at school and at home, you know, it's this whole perpetuation of violence, and we need to have programs in place in order to help and facilitate these children not to be lured into gangs and gangsterism. You know, I think we need to provide education for our children. I mean, I think education is so important. Education changes people's lives, and I think we need to start giving these kids hope. And it doesn't really matter because I come from that area. So we need to be able to just spread some good stories, and in order to say, well, it's not all just doom and gloom, but most certainly we need to go to the root of the problem, and we need to do it. We need to start at home, and we need to start at a grassroots level.
Just as a follow-up to that question, have you ever considered using the Wheat Trust in that area. And, you know, we've had so many good stories before that there were good stories to tell. They're now being told at the Zondo Commission.
Yes.
So, you know, these good stories will remain stories, you know, unless we can do something about this scourge.
So our trust really goes to the heart of upliftment, and we go to the heart of the communities, because normally you'll find it is the women that look after the children and the grandmothers, and those are the women that will ultimately go out and put food on the table. So we say, we train ladies, we train the women to be able to support themselves, to be able to provide for their children, to give them training, and ultimately for their children to see, well, my mom has now a sewing business or a beading business or whatever business she may choose to have. But the trust indeed, it's, we have funding issues, it's an NGO, it normally does, but we really are at the grassroots level where we try and assist the community. That is our focus.
Thank you. My second question, Chief Justice, relates to one of your qualifications, which I'm very interested in, because I think all of us here are passionate about the environment.
Yes.
And you've got a master's in environmental law.
Yes.
Have you found that that qualification has assisted you in any cases? Because I know in the Western Cape in particular, there are a number of environmental issues. Your abalone poaching, your conflict with the fishermen and fishery licenses, the question of nets being put up and whales being captured and killed.
Yes.
So have you had to deal with any of these matters in your court?
Commissioner, the only matters that I've dealt with from an environmental aspect was when years ago we had a situation where there was a proliferation of the establishment of golf courses, and in areas where, you know, the communities in the areas suffered, and of course there were all sorts of regulatory aspects. But I'm afraid this goes back to racism and selected briefs. I haven't had the opportunity to, in fact, utilize my environmental degree as much as I would have liked.
Thank you, Chief Justice.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. You know, the mention of Cape Flat just triggered something. About 2-3 weeks ago, I was asked by the El Dorado Park community, there's drugs, gangs. They asked me to come and speak to them, pray with them, and encourage them. But what hit me was this. Judge Francis, one of our judges, is a resident of that place. And they draw a lot of hope and inspiration from him.
Yes.
And just by the way, that was the week when we delivered our judgment on corporal punishment. And every time they tried to ask me about it, I said, it is Francis who started it. Now, don't you think it would make a world of difference if those of us who were born and bred in these troubled areas do not, as soon as life brightens up,
Yes.
run away from where we come from
Yes.
and unintentionally lose touch
Correct.
with the happenings on the ground, but actually stay there. As many of us as possible, stay within the community, but even if you don't stay, visit regularly.
Yes.
So that it doesn't look like it's a place for the hopeless, for the neglected, for the forgotten.
Yes. My family still lives there, so we haven't abandoned our roots. My family is still very much entrenched in the community. My mother walks the streets. She's 72. She walks the neighborhoods. It's not safe, but she loves doing it and she loves interacting with her friends in the next block. So I think it's very important for us to nurture, and I think something that I'm very passionate about is mentoring the young kids from my neighborhood, and just encouraging them, because not everyone's paths are the same. So just because somebody's failed here doesn't mean that that's the end of the road for them. My path wasn't certainly the usual standard rosy road, but I encourage them to say, well, each of us, our paths are different, and just because you have a stumbling block in one area of your life doesn't mean that it's a closed door. We all have our different paths and we all have our different journeys, but it's a case of just giving the kids hope and not losing sight of the communities where we come from.
Oh, so you still go home?
I do indeed,
Okay.
every single weekend.
Okay. Honorable Nyambi?
Thank you, CJ.
Afternoon.
Afternoon, Advocate.
Afternoon.
Let me also commend you for your pro bono work.
Thank you.
You had an opportunity of being briefed as one of the evidence leaders in the Commission of Inquiry, which focus on the Marikana massacre.
Yes.
To date, we still read, or when there is the commemoration of that day,
Yes.
that those families is still not a closed chapter, even though we had a commission.
Yeah.
So out of your experience, what is it that is missing so that those poor, struggling communities can be assisted so that the chapter can be closed once and for all?
Commissioner,
Maybe before she answered, isn't it a different Marikana one? This one, yours was the national commissioner, was about the national commissioner.
yes, indeed, Chief Justice, my one was the class and inquiry, which focused on the conduct of the police commissioner at the time and her conduct leading up to, I would call it to Marikana. It was a tragedy more than anything else. So I think if I understand your question, that related to the actual Marikana inquiry. So I'm afraid I won't be able to be in a position to answer your question, unfortunately. But I understand that most certainly going through that inquiry, going through that commission, and in fact being there and having the families of the miners present was quite a life-changing experience, and I think that the powers that be should really finalize. It should really be finalized. It's been years overdue, in my view.
When
CJ, the matter she's talking about is on the roll in the Northwest. The criminal matter.
Okay, yes. I take it that you won't proceed beyond that. Yes,
No, sir.
Honorable Nyambi?
the Advocate, when responding to the question by JP about you touched the issue of racism in the judiciary. Any personal
Did you? No, it was in the advocate's profession,
Advocates.
wasn't it?
Yes.
In the advocate's profession, not the judiciary.
CJ, she said there is racism in the advocate's profession.
Yes.
So, any personal experience that you can share with us that you might have experienced?
Commissioner, it's very subtle, but ultimately it comes down to, and in fact it's more racism together with gender, sexism, where in fact I'm not going to give you the brief because it's too complicated. and I will give it to a male counterpart. So that is our reality as practitioners, not being exposed or not being given the opportunity of being briefed, because ultimately that is our practice, that is our living, that's what we do. So yes, that would be my response.
Thank you, Advocate. Thank you, CJ.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you so much. Advocate Masuku?
Thank you, Chief Justice. Advocate Kusevitsky, I looked through your application and there's one thing that is missing. Because you and I worked together in the class inquiry,
Yes,
and you told me that you are an athlete of some sort.
an athlete.
Yes, and in the clotting process, you forgot to mention that you have you're a very dangerous person.
Well, Commissioner, it so happens that both you and I share a love of martial arts. Commissioner Masuku is a black belt, and I'm a second dan black belt in my previous life.
So don't mess up with it. But I just also wanted to share the experience you and I had. I met you at a mall. I hope you don't mind me sharing this.
No, that's fine.
In Cape Town, and it was in December, and you were about to leave the bar,
Yes.
and we spoke about why you were leaving the bar. Can you share with the Commission that conversation? Because it's better off if it comes from you than if I share it. Because I thought it's important after following from what you said when you asked by the previous commissioner, relating to your experience, to the reality of being a woman advocate at the bar.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. It was at a time where being a practitioner is essentially one's own boss. One is reliant upon briefs. And at that time, there are so many challenges as a black practitioner, but as a black female practitioner, the challenges are even worse. And I had been contemplating, in fact, leaving the bar. And I mean, the rate of attrition at our bar is quite frightening. The amount of black counsel, female counsel, I mean, the statistics are quite frightening. But I was leaving, and I think it was divine intervention when I ran into you at the store. And, you know, it just so happened that you were starting with the commission. And when we talk about transformation, I think that's a prime example of fellow colleagues assisting. And I was going to call you by your name, but Commissioner roped me in together with the evidence leader. And that's basically what assisted me.
Thank you, Chief Justice. Thank you.
Thank you, President Maya.
Thank you, Chief Justice. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, President.
You know, I have to say that I was deeply touched by your story as set out in your biography. Your struggle to get admitted to university, for one thing, when you were obviously bright enough to get in easily. But here you are today.
Thank you.
I just wanted to know more about two matters that you raised in your application form. And I think these achievements actually set you apart from your women competitors. Your work, your work with the Junior Bar Committee.
Yes.
I have special interest, you know, in that, because we frequently try to explore the challenges that women, especially black women, face in private practice, and we ask candidates who come here all the time, what can be done to assist, to keep them, in the system so that they can widen this pool from
Yes.
which we draw judges. Now, I'd like to know what issues you tackled as that committee and what successes, if any, you achieved. And when you finish with that, I'd like to know a little more about the Wheat Trust, which sounds like a women's self-help association, which our mothers, my grandmother, my mother, were members of Women's Zenzele, the Y.
Yes.
Those two groupings, please.
When I started at the bar, of course, we weren't given lavish briefs from the top law firms, and of course, we had to pay our dues. And I was in the criminal courts for about 2 to 3 years doing legal aid work. And to me, I think it's a wonderful way to start out as an advocate, because you learn to be your best and you learn the art of trial advocacy. But the problem is, and your rate of attrition of counsel, especially black counsel, is in your 0 to 5 year category. That is your make or break. And that's why when we started, it was a case of, I just need to get to 5 years, or I just need to get to 2 years. But we weren't getting paid by the legal aid, and it was always a case of some sort of delay or the other. And a few colleagues and I started this committee where we started to interact with the head of the legal aid board and to say, please can we get paid once we have completed our trial or completed a month? Hand in your certificates and can we get paid within 30 days? Because ultimately, we know the nature. A trial gets allocated and it's set down for 3 to 4 weeks. But ultimately, it doesn't happen that way. It runs for 5 months. And as a practitioner, you cannot wait for 5 months to get paid because you have to pay bar dues and you have a family to support. So it was a case of trying to get payments from the legal aid board, from the state attorney. But also, it was a case of how do we get the senior members to transfer skills? Because ultimately, in order to be a good practitioner, we need to be taught, we need to be mentored. It's fine, you've done your bar, you've written your bar exam, but now you need the experience. So we say, fine, seniors, do you have an open door policy where we as juniors can come and you can take us under your wing and show us and rope us in, because that's also part of the transformation. So of course that is now standardized. We have a policy from 0 to 5 years where juniors, once they've completed their pupillage, they are allocated to seniors where that skills transfer occurs. Insofar as wheat is concerned, I mean, it's a very fulfilling task. I said earlier that we have a challenge in that, everything revolves around donations, because the donations that we get, we then provide grantees. Grantees make application. They come with us with business plans to say, well, I want to sew, or I want to do beading, or I want whatever they want to do. And they make application, and we follow up ultimately. I mean, it's countrywide. And some of the success, in fact, my executive director was a grantee 20 years ago. So she had applied for a grant. And now she's the director of the Wheat Trust. So that is why it's a case of, it's just building just giving people back their dignity, really, and just equality, making women feel that they are part of society and that they too can achieve.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Norman?
Thank you, Chief Justice. Just one question. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Ms. Kusevitsky. I just want to understand any particular reason you did not join Advocates for Transformation. I see your work with communities, but is there any reason why you didn't want
I am a member
to participate?
of AFT. I am.
Are you? Oh,
I
it's
am.
not reflected in your application. Yeah, if you go back to it, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chief
you.
Justice.
Thank you
Thanks.
so
Okay.
much. Colleagues, just a caution. We of course have to be thorough, but at this rate, having still to interview 3 candidates, we'll probably finish at about 8 or 9. And it's my understanding that the representative of the Premier has to, the latest, leave this place at 7:30 because her flight is at 8:40. So I just thought I must just conscientize colleagues about that. We shouldn't compromise. Oh, you're excused, ma'am.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, you shouldn't compromise on the quality of the interview, but just be alive to that reality. 8, 9, and I don't know if she will get another flight. Okay.